The communications screen on the wall showed 6 faces. All 6 were senior officers on the Velthari flagship. Yara recognized each of them: her Second Fleet commander, 2 tactical officers, the ship's admiral, and 2 others who she was fairly certain had no business being on the bridge, but had crowded in anyway, because the situation had moved past the point where proper bridge protocol mattered. They all looked at her. Then they looked at Kang. Then back at her. None of them said anything. Yara understood the silence. She had been in command long enough to know what it meant when officers who were trained to project confidence suddenly had none to project. They did not know what they were looking at. The unyielding dawn had gone dark and dead, and then it had lit up like a sun, and then their boarding team had gone completely silent, and then 20 minutes had passed with nothing at all. No signal, no movement from the ship, nothing. They had been sitting in that flagship, watching a glowing alien vessel and thinking thoughts that none of them had wanted to say out loud. She would have felt some sympathy for them if she had not been currently standing with every muscle below her chin locked in place. "Report," said the flagship admiral. His name was Torin. He was a cautious man in his late career who had spent 50 years being cautious successfully. He looked cautious now in the extreme. Every line of his face pulled tight, his voice controlled, his eyes moving between Yara and Kang, with the careful assessment of a man trying to find the correct response to something he had no previous reference for. "Stand down," Yara said. Torin blinked. "Commander?" "Stand down the weapon systems," she said again, clearly. "All targeting locks on the unyielding dawn. Disengage." A pause. On the screen, she watched one of the tactical officers look at Torin. Torin looked at Yara. "Commander, your status." "My status is that I am aboard the unyielding dawn, and I am delivering you instructions from its captain," she said. She paused for only half a second on that word, captain, but she said it, and she meant it, because that was what the situation was, and she was not a person who pretended situations were different than they were. "Stand down your weapons, now." Another pause. Then Torin said quietly, off to the side, "Disengage all targeting locks." A soft series of confirmations from off-screen. He looked back at her. "Done." Kang, standing just out of frame, gave no visible reaction. He had been watching the exchange with the calm, patient attention of someone listening to a conversation in a language they understood, but were letting others work through on their own terms. Yara looked at him. He stepped into the frame. The reaction on the flagship bridge was subtle, but she saw it. The slight straightening, the small collective adjustment of posture that happened when people recognized they were now looking directly at the person they needed to address. Kang was not tall, not physically commanding, not dressed in anything that suggested authority. He looked objectively like a tired maintenance worker standing in a very well-lit corridor. And yet something about the way he stood, or perhaps something about the light of the ship around him, the steady golden warmth that seemed to follow him, to orient itself to him, made the officers on that screen look at him differently than they might have looked at another human in another circumstance. "My name is Kang," he said. "I'm going to be honest with you, because I think that's faster and I am very tired." He looked directly into the screen. "Your fleet destroyed every ship Earth sent out here. I understand you were following your own orders and objectives, and I am not going to pretend I know the full political picture that led to today. But I need you to understand the picture right now." He gestured, a short, understated motion, at the corridor around him. "This ship is awake. It was not awake an hour ago. It is awake now because of me, specifically, not any other human, not any piece of technology your people or mine built, but because of my blood and what it is. I don't fully understand all of what that means yet, but the ship does, and it has shown me enough." He paused. "Your soldiers, all 20 of them, plus your commander, are unharmed and alive inside this ship. They will stay that way, but they are not moving, and they will not move until I choose to release them. That is not a threat. That is just the current situation. Torin on the screen said nothing. What I want, Kang continued, is simple. I want a channel, a direct recorded channel to every human refugee station, every escape pod, every corner of space where humans are still alive and waiting to find out if today was the end of everything. I want them to hear that it isn't. He looked steadily at the screen. Your fleet will provide safe passage for all human survivors. No pursuit, no collection, no further engagement. In exchange, your commander and her soldiers walk off this ship unharmed. This conversation ends, and we go our separate ways. The flagship bridge was very quiet. It was then that a second signal cut into the channel. Unexpected, patched through by someone on the Earth side who had been monitoring every open frequency in the area, and had recognized Kang's voice. The second screen that opened on the wall showed a different face. A woman, in her 30s with short hair and a refugee station uniform, eyes red from too little sleep and too much fear. She had been Earth's last operational diplomat before the battle began, and she had spent the last several hours in a pressurized shelter on a small refugee station, telling 300 civilians that she did not know what was going to happen next. She was staring at the screen with an expression that Yara, watching from the side, found unexpectedly moving. Not joy exactly, but something that sat just next to it. The relief of someone who had been holding their breath for hours and had finally, cautiously, allowed themselves to start exhaling. Kang, Hana said. Her voice was steady, but only barely. Hana, he said. His voice changed slightly when he said her name. Not dramatically, not in a way that the fleet officers would notice. But Yara noticed. Something in it loosened, the way a person's voice loosens when they see something familiar in an unfamiliar place. Is this real? Hana asked. He looked at the screen with the exhausted, direct expression of a man who had stopped performing anything for anyone. Yes, he said. She pressed her hand flat over her mouth for a moment, composing herself. Then she lowered it and sat straight and looked at him with the face of a diplomat finding the professional back under the person. What do you need? Coordinates, he said. All survival stations, all refugee clusters, all life signs in the system that are human. I'll relay them to the Velthari fleet. He glanced toward the flagship screen. They're going to make sure those people are safe. Torin, on the flagship screen, opened his mouth. Kang looked at him calmly. Torin closed it again. There was a long, particular silence, the kind that had weight to it, the kind that existed in the space between an old order ending and a new one not yet fully formed. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, Yara watched Torin's face go through the private calculations of a man deciding whether to push back against something or to accept that the situation had moved past the point where pushing back was rational. She had seen that calculation on that face before. She knew which way it usually went. Agreed, Torin said. Hana was already relaying coordinates. Kang looked at the wall, where the ship was already receiving the data and processing it. She could feel the ship doing something, some process in its vast systems, translating and relaying and confirming, all without any visible interface, all through the connection between the ship and the man who had woken it. He was not pressing buttons, he was not typing commands, he was just standing there, present, and the ship was moving around him like a living thing, oriented to its center. He turned to Yara. I'm releasing the field, he said. Your soldiers can move in about 30 seconds. Your shuttle is still docked. You can leave when you're ready. He said it simply, without ceremony, without drama. Yara felt the field release, a slow, warm unwinding, like a fist opening, and then her hands were her own again, her neck, her legs, all of it returning to her in a rush that she let show on her face for exactly 1 second before she locked it back down. Around her, She heard the sounds of her soldiers recovering, sharp intakes of breath, the small stumble of a boot finding the floor again, the clatter of the half-drawn weapon being holstered. Doss appeared at her side. He said nothing. He looked at Kang once, a long, assessing look, and then looked at Yara. She nodded once, very slightly. They would leave. But before she turned toward the boarding tube, Yara stopped. She looked at Kang one more time. He was already looking at the communication screen, at Hana's face, at the coordinates coming through, at the work that needed doing. He was already past her, already moving forward, already being what the ship had recognized him as from the moment his palm touched that panel. She had come here expecting surrender. She had come here to collect a broken ship and a frightened engineer. She had found neither. "Kang," she said. He turned. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she inclined her head, not deeply, not in the elaborate formal way of Velthari ceremonial culture, but clearly enough to mean something. He returned it. She turned and walked to the boarding tube, her soldiers filing in behind her, and the door of the unyielding dawn closed quietly at her back. In the corridor, Kang stood alone in the golden light. On the screen, Hana was still talking. Logistics, numbers, names of stations, the careful, practical language of a diplomat, doing her job in the middle of something that had not finished surprising her yet. The ship hummed around him, warm and steady and awake, waiting for wherever he decided to go next. He reached into his pocket and touched the letter. Did not take it out, just touched it. "You are not just an engineer, Kang. You never were." Old Day had known. Kang looked at the screen, at the coordinates, at the long list of names and stations and the work ahead of him. And he exhaled slowly. Then he walked toward the captain's chair, his chair, in his ship, and sat down in it for the first time. Outside, the Velthari fleet was already moving, not toward anything human, away. And the unyielding dawn, fully alive for the first time in decades, turned its prow toward the stars, and prepared to do what it had been waiting 40 years and one bloodline to do. Begin. Time moved strangely when you could not move your body. Yara had been frozen for, she estimated, about 12 minutes. She could not check her wrist display, because her arm was not moving. She could not turn her head to look at Doss, because her neck was not moving. She could not do anything except stand in the corridor of this glowing ship, and breathe, and think, and watch the human sitting on the floor 10 meters away, reading a piece of paper. She had been in difficult situations before, many of them. She had been in battles she had almost lost. She had been wounded twice. She had once been trapped for 6 hours in a collapsed structure on a moon with a broken leg and only a small emergency light for company. She had handled all of those things with the calm, controlled approach that her training and her nature both demanded. This was different. Not because she was in danger. She did not think the human was going to hurt her. She did not know exactly why she thought that, but she did. It was something in the way he carried himself, something in the fact that he had walked back here without any urgency, without any anger visible in his face, and sat down on the floor and started reading a letter like a man waiting for a delayed transport. It was different, because for the first time in a very long time, she did not understand what was happening. She was the most decorated commander in the Velthari fleet. She had studied every species humanity had encountered, every ship class they operated, every piece of military strategy their generals had ever published. She knew human beings better than most Velthari officers cared to know them. Their biology, their psychology, their history, the particular combination of stubbornness and adaptability that made them irritating opponents. She had read every intelligence report on the unyielding dawn that existed. None of those reports had mentioned anything like this. The field that was holding her, holding all of them, was not in any database she had access to. Not Velthari, not Gathori, not any of the 7 other spacefaring species whose technology records the Velthari maintained. Whatever the unyielding dawn was built on, whoever had built it, they had kept it very far from everyone else's knowledge. It was not just advanced, it was categorically different. The kind of different that suggested not a gap in technology, but a gap in kind. The difference between a stone axe and a plasma cutter was just progress. But the difference between a lock and a resonance field that stopped living bodies was something else entirely. Could not see most of them. Her field of vision was locked forward, but she knew they were there, and she could imagine their state well enough. 20 trained Velthari combat soldiers, frozen mid-movement, staring in whatever direction their heads had been pointing when the field hit. The indignity of it was enormous. These were the best soldiers in her division. They had boarded a disabled human vessel to accept the surrender of a single engineer. And now they were statues in a golden corridor. The human finished reading his letter. He folded it carefully, the same precise fold it had been in before, and tucked it back into his pocket. Then he sat there a moment longer, with his head tilted back against the wall, and his eyes on the ceiling. He was not gloating. He was not monologuing. He was just sitting. Then he stood up, put his hands in his pockets, and started walking. He walked through the corridor slowly, the way a person walks when they are simply moving from one room to another, with no particular rush. He passed Doss first. Doss, whose hard face was now locked in an expression of mid-sentence confusion, eyes focused on a spot just past his left shoulder, where he had been turning to speak to someone. Kang glanced at him the way you might glance at a piece of furniture, acknowledging its existence without finding it interesting, and kept walking. He passed 3 soldiers standing in a tight cluster near the wall. He passed 2 more who had been moving toward the corridor junction when the field hit, caught mid-step with one boot slightly off the ground. He passed a young soldier with a weapon half drawn from its holster, hand frozen around the grip, and he glanced at that one for a half-second longer than the others, not with menace, but with something that looked more like the expression a teacher makes when they see a student reaching for the wrong answer. He walked the entire length of the frozen column. Then he turned around and walked back. He stopped when he reached Yara. She met his gaze. She could do that much. She held it steadily, the way she always held eye contact, like it was a contest, and she had no intention of losing. He looked at her for a moment, with those calm, dark eyes. He was close enough now that she could see the details of his face clearly, the tiredness around his eyes, the smudge of grease on the back of his left hand, the worn collar of his maintenance uniform. He looked like exactly what he was, a working engineer who had been awake for too long, and had been through something catastrophic, and had ended up here through a set of circumstances that he had clearly not planned in advance. That was the part she could not reconcile. That was the thing that kept circling in her mind while she stood frozen in his ship. He had not planned this. She was almost certain of it. The activation of the ship, the knowledge of what it could do, the decision to use the resonance field instead of the weapons, none of it had the shape of a prepared strategy. It had the shape of a person improvising with tools they were only just learning they had, which meant that the power was not in the plan. The power was in him, in his blood, in whatever that bloodline actually was, which meant one deeply uncomfortable question. If this was him improvising, just one man reading a letter and figuring things out as he went, what was this ship actually capable of in the hands of someone who had been trained to use it? Kang looked at her a moment longer. "I'm not going to hurt your soldiers," he said. His voice was even and straightforward. "I'm going to hold them here until I've decided what to do. They'll be fine. The field doesn't damage anything. They can breathe. Their blood is moving." He paused. "They're just not going anywhere." He reached into the pocket that did not have the letter, and pulled out a small energy bar, the kind of cheap compressed nutrition block that maintenance workers kept in their kits because they often missed meals. He peeled back the wrapper and took a bite. "I want to have a conversation," he said, "with someone who can make decisions for your fleet. Not just give orders, actually make decisions. I don't know if that's you or someone on your flagship." He looked at her with a question in his eyes. "Can you communicate with your fleet if I give you partial freedom of movement? Just your head, just your voice?" Yara could not answer, because her jaw was locked. He noticed that. He thought about it for a moment, then pressed his palm flat to the wall of the corridor. The ship responded. She felt it before she saw any evidence of it. A shift in the field, a specific release that moved like a wave from the wall outward and stopped at her chin. Her jaw moved. She said nothing for a moment, just to confirm that she could. Her tongue ran along the inside of her teeth. She breathed a little differently. Then she looked at him. "I make decisions for this fleet," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, which she was quietly proud of. Kang nodded. He took another bite of his energy bar and looked at the wall, then back at her. "Good," he said simply. He walked to the corridor wall and pressed his hand to a panel. The ship responded immediately. A communication screen bloomed open in the wall, tuned to the general fleet frequency. The Valthari flagship signal appeared on it at once. Her crew, she imagined, had been watching the unyielding dawn in stunned silence for the last 20 minutes, waiting for some kind of signal. Now they were going to get one. Kang stepped slightly to the side, not hiding, just making room, and looked at Yara. Kang walked back to the core chamber, the same way he had walked there the first time, without rushing, without running, without the kind of dramatic urgency that the situation probably deserved. His boots made a soft, steady sound against the floor. The golden light in the walls pulsed gently around him as he moved, like the ship was tracking him, aware of where he was at every moment. He had felt that awareness the second he had pressed his hand to the panel. It was not a feeling he had words for exactly. It was not like a machine turning on. It was not the mechanical satisfaction of a broken engine finally starting up. The kind of feeling he was used to. The click of parts settling into place. The vibration of systems coming to life. This had been different. When the ship had woken up, it had not felt like a machine waking. It had felt like something recognizing him. Like a door, not just opening, but opening specifically for him. Knowing who was on the other side, and choosing to let him in. He had stood in the chamber for about 10 minutes after the initial activation, just letting himself feel it. The ship had fed him information in a way he could not quite explain, not in words, not in images, but in a kind of deep, wordless understanding that settled into his mind like water filling a container. He had not known before that moment that the ship had 17 distinct weapon systems. He had not known that its hull could withstand a direct strike from the heaviest Valthari cannon without damage. He had not known about the resonance field, the ship's strangest and most powerful defense, or what it did, or how it worked. Now he knew all of it. Something the ship had communicated to him in that quiet, wordless way of its. A piece of information that had sat in the back of his mind during his entire walk back to meet Yara and her soldiers, and that had been sitting there still while she delivered her ultimatum. The ship knew his bloodline, not just recognized it, knew it. The way the ship's core had responded to his DNA was not a simple mechanical match, a key fitting a lock. It was more than that. The ship's systems carried a record, buried deep in their architecture, of the bloodline it had been built to respond to. And that record matched Kang's blood not just partially, not just closely, but exactly. His family line, traced all the way back to old days' obsessive genealogy and further, past every record his grandfather had ever found, connected to something so old that the ship itself was its only remaining evidence. His grandfather had been right. They were not just an ordinary family. Kang stepped into the core chamber and walked to the platform. He stood in front of the panel for a moment, looking at it. The golden light in here was slightly brighter than in the corridors, deeper, richer, like the air itself was made of warm metal. The platform hummed under his feet with a frequency that he could feel in his chest. He pressed his palm to the panel again. This time it was not an activation. He was already inside the ship's systems, already recognized, already welcomed. This was him asking a question, not in words, but in intention, in the shape of what he needed, and the ship answering it. He needed the soldiers gone, not killed. He had thought about that, briefly, in the abstract way a person thinks about extreme options when they are facing extreme situations. He had decided against it almost immediately. Not out of weakness. He understood that these soldiers had just destroyed his fleet and killed everyone he had served with for 18 months. He had a right to be angry about that, and he was, in a cold and quiet way that sat beneath everything else he was feeling. But killing them while they stood unarmed in his corridor felt wrong to him in a way he could not argue past, so he had not tried to. He wanted them still. He wanted Yara to understand, in the clearest possible way, that she had made a mistake coming aboard. The ship understood. It showed him the resonance field, let him feel the shape of it, the range of it, the way it worked. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It did not fire, did not burn, did not cut. It was a field generated by the ship's core that interacted with biological systems in a very specific way. Any living being inside the field who did not carry noble DNA was rendered completely immobile, not unconscious, not harmed, but simply stopped. Every muscle locked, every voluntary movement ceased. They could breathe, their hearts would keep beating, their minds would keep working, but they would not be able to move a single finger. The range was the entire ship. Kang stood with his hand on the panel for a moment longer. He thought about his grandfather again, about old Day sitting at the kitchen table, with papers spread everywhere, tracing lines and dates and names with a careful finger, muttering to himself about connections that no one else could see. He thought about how the old man had looked at him sometimes, with that particular expression, the one that Kang had always interpreted as simple pride, but now understood as something more complicated, something that carried the weight of knowledge being held back until the right moment. He thought about the letter in his pocket. You are not just an engineer, Kang. You never were. He exhaled. He pressed his intention into the panel. Not a command exactly, more like a direction, a point on a map, and the ship moved toward it without hesitation. The resonance field came online so quietly that there was no announcement, no alarm, no visible change in the ship. The golden light did not flicker. The hum of the engines did not change. Nothing dramatic happened in the core chamber. There was just a very slight deepening of the warmth in the air, a barely perceptible shift in the frequency of the floor's vibration, and then nothing. Nothing visible. But in the main corridor, 30 meters away, 20 Velthari soldiers and their commander had just stopped moving entirely. Kang lifted his hand from the panel. He turned and walked back toward the corridor, still unhurried, still quiet. He passed through 2 sections of the ship before the corridor curved and the boarding group came into view. He saw them from 20 meters away first, a wall of armored soldiers, frozen in whatever position they had been standing in when the field hit. Some were mid-step. One had a hand raised, reaching for his weapon. Doss was turned slightly to the side, as if he had been about to say something to the soldier next to him. And Yara was standing exactly where Kang had left her. She had not moved. She had not tried to follow him. She was standing in the middle of the corridor, with her arms at her sides, and her head lifted at that particular angle that people in positions of power used when they wanted to make it clear that they were not surprised by anything. The angle that said they had seen everything before, and none of it impressed them. That angle had not changed. but her eyes had. Her eyes, Kang noticed as he walked closer, were moving. She could move her eyes. Everything else about her was locked in place. But she could see him coming, and she could feel what had happened. And whatever she was seeing in his face, as he walked toward her, was doing something to the expression in those eyes that all her training and composure could not fully contain. Kang stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back at him, steady, still, jaw set, not giving him anything except that look. He nodded once, the same way she had not nodded at him when he had nodded at her earlier. Then he walked past her frozen soldiers, past Doss and his half-finished sentence, and sat down on the floor of the corridor, with his back against the wall. He pulled his grandfather's letter out of his pocket. He unfolded it carefully, and read it again, slowly, from beginning to end. The golden light held steady. Outside, the Velthari fleet was watching the unyielding dawn, and not saying anything at all. The Velthari had not expected the ship to light up. No one aboard Commander Yara's vessel had expected it. When the golden glow had erupted across the hull of the unyielding dawn, visible even from 3,000 kilometers away, every screen on the Velthari bridge had gone blank for half a second before the sensors scrambled to catch up. Yara had been standing at the forward window with a cold drink in her hand, watching the dead human fleet drift in pieces, when the light hit her face. She had stared at it for a long moment. Then she had set her drink down very carefully, and said nothing. Her second-in-command, Doss, had been the first to speak. He was a tall, broad-shouldered soldier, with a flat, hard face, and the kind of confidence that came from winning every fight he had ever been in. He had looked at the glowing ship, looked at the sensors, and then looked at Yara with an expression that said he was not impressed. "Power surge from emergency cells," Doss said. "The ship's dying. Last gasp." Yara had not answered him. She kept watching the light. It was not a dying light. She had seen dying ships before. She had destroyed enough of them to know what they looked like from the outside, the flickering, the sparking, the pale and uneven glow of systems failing. This was different. This light was steady, warm, alive. It moved across the hull like something breathing. "Scan it again," she said. The sensor operator ran a second scan, then a third. Then he turned around in his chair with an expression that Yara had never seen on his face before, something between confusion and something harder to name. "Commander," he said, "the ship's core is active." Silence on the bridge. "Not emergency cells," he continued. "The main core. Full activation. All systems online." He paused. "Whatever that ship is built on, it is running at full power." Doss turned to look at the screen. "That is not possible. Our intelligence confirmed that ship has never been activated. Humans have had it for 40 years. They could not." "Someone did," Yara said quietly. She turned and walked to her command chair. She sat, crossed one leg over the other, and looked at the glowing ship on the screen with narrow eyes. She was not a reckless commander. She had not risen to her rank by being reckless. She was careful, precise, and very good at reading situations. Right now, the situation was telling her several things at once. First, there was at least one human still alive on that ship. Second, that human had somehow activated a vessel that 40 years of human science could not activate. Third, she did not know what that ship was capable of now that it was running. That third point was the one that made the back of her neck feel cold. She thought for a moment. Then she stood up again. "Prepare a boarding team," she said. 20 soldiers, full armor. I will lead it personally." Doss looked at her. "You want to board it yourself?" "I want to see this human myself," she said. 20 soldiers is more than enough for one survivor." Doss did not argue. He never argued with her in front of the crew. He waited until they were in the corridor outside the bridge, walking toward the armory, before he spoke again. "This could be a trap," he said. "One human," Yara said. On a ship his people could not even turn on until 20 minutes ago. What kind of trap does he set? Doss said nothing. He pulled his armor from the rack and began putting it on. They crossed the gap in a boarding shuttle, 20 Velthari soldiers in full combat gear, weapons ready, visors down. Yara sat at the front of the shuttle in her command coat. No helmet, no armor. She did not feel she needed it. The boarding tube locked onto the unyielding Dawn's side hatch, and the door opened without resistance. The golden light hit them the moment they stepped inside. Yara had not expected it to be so warm. Everything about Velthari ships was cold. Cool metal, cool light, the clean, sterile feel of controlled environments. The unyielding Dawn felt like walking into something alive. The walls glowed softly. The floor hummed beneath their boots. The air smelled different, not stale like a dead ship, not recycled like a working one. It smelled like something older, something she did not have a word for. Doss moved his soldiers into formation around her without being asked. They found Kang in the main corridor. He was standing about 30 meters from the boarding hatch, leaning against the wall with his arms folded across his chest. He was not armed, as far as Yara could see. He was wearing a maintenance uniform, gray, worn at the elbows, and his boots were scuffed. He was not a tall man. He had a calm face, dark eyes, and the kind of stillness about him that could either mean he was completely at peace or completely out of ideas. Yara walked forward until she was 10 meters away, and stopped. She looked at him. He looked at her. She had expected fear. She always saw fear when humans looked at her, at the soldiers behind her, at the weapons, at the sheer size of the force she brought into every room. It was not cruelty that made her enjoy it. It was practicality. Fear made people sensible. Sensible people surrendered faster and caused fewer problems. This man did not look afraid. He looked tired, maybe, a little, but not afraid. "You are the only one alive on this ship," Yara said. She spoke in Standard, the trade language that most spacefaring species shared. She knew humans understood it. Kang nodded once. "Seems that way." "You activated this vessel." He did not answer that. He just looked at her with those calm, dark eyes. Yara let the silence sit for a moment. Then she spoke again, still calm, still measured, but with a weight in her voice that made her soldiers stand a little straighter. "You have 1 minute," she said. "Kneel, surrender the ship, and you will be taken prisoner. That is more than most humans were given today." She paused. "Do not waste the minute." One of the soldiers behind her, a young one, Yara noticed, let out a short, quiet laugh. Doss said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Kang unfolded his arms. He looked at them all, Yara, Doss, the 20 soldiers, with an expression that Yara found difficult to read. It was not defiance exactly. It was not bravado. It was something quieter than both of those things. Something that looked almost like a decision being made. "I appreciate the offer," he said. He pushed off the wall and turned around. "Give me a second," he said, and walked back down the corridor toward the core chamber. Yara watched him go. She tilted her head slightly. Doss leaned close. "Do we follow?" She watched Kang's back disappear around the curve of the corridor. The ship hummed around them. The golden light was steady and warm. "No," she said slowly. "We wait." She did not know why she said that. She told herself it was tactics. Better to let him come back than to chase him into an unknown ship layout. But the truth, the part she did not say out loud, was simpler than that. She wanted to see what he was going to do. The ship was dead. Every light was off. Every screen was black. The only sound inside the unyielding dawn was the low hum of emergency oxygen cycling through cracked vents, and the slow, steady footsteps of the one man still walking its halls. Kang moved through the dark corridor with a small handheld torch. Its pale beam cutting through the smoke that still drifted from the engine room. He was not in a hurry. There was nowhere to go. The battle had ended 3 hours ago, and Earth's fleet, what was left of it, had been reduced to floating wreckage and silence. He was the only one left. He had not planned to survive. No one had. When the Velthari warships had dropped out of hyperspace above the asteroid belt, the Earth fleet's commanders had known, within the first 30 seconds, that they were outmatched. The Velthari did not come to negotiate. They came to end things. Their weapons punched through Earth's best warships like a blade through paper. Destroyers, cruisers, carrier ships, gone in minutes. Kang had watched it all from the lower engine bay of the unyielding Dawn, where he had been trying to fix a coolant pipe with a wrench and a string of quiet curses. He had not even been at a battle station when it started. The ship had taken 3 direct hits in the first wave. The captain was dead. The first officer was dead. Half the crew had been vented into space when the portside hull collapsed. Kang had survived because the engine bay was deep in the ship's belly, shielded by layers of old metal and a stroke of terrible luck. He had been knocked unconscious by a pressure blast, and when he woke up, the battle was over and he was alone. That had been 3 hours ago. Now he walked the empty halls of the unyielding Dawn and tried to think clearly. The unyielding Dawn was not a normal ship. Everyone in the fleet knew that, though few knew the full story. It had been discovered 40 years ago, drifting near a dead star system far past the edge of mapped space. A recovery team had hauled it back to Earth orbit, where scientists and engineers had spent decades trying to understand it. The ship was enormous, 3 times the size of Earth's largest carrier. Its hull was made of a material that no lab on Earth could identify. Its interior design was unlike anything human hands had built. It was clearly ancient, clearly alien in origin, and clearly far beyond Earth's current technology. But it would not turn on. No matter what engineers tried, the ship's core systems refused to activate. Screens stayed dark. Engines stayed cold. The ship simply sat there, enormous and silent, like a locked door with no keyhole anyone could find. Eventually, the military had decided to use it anyway, as a transport and storage vessel, running on portable power units bolted onto its frame like patches on old clothing. It was embarrassing, in a way. The most advanced vessel humanity had ever found, hauled across the galaxy on borrowed energy. Kang had been assigned to it as a maintenance engineer 18 months ago. His job was simple: keep the portable power units running, patch leaks, fix what broke. He was good at his job. He was not a soldier, not a scientist, not an officer. He was a 31-year-old man from Busan, who was very good at understanding broken machines and very bad at everything else. He stopped walking when he reached the door at the end of the corridor. It was a door he had passed 100 times in 18 months and never opened. Not because it was locked, the handle turned freely, but because the room beyond it had always been completely dark and completely empty, and there had never been a reason to go in. Engineers had been inside during the initial survey years ago. Just a large circular chamber with a raised platform in the center, and in the middle of that platform, a smooth panel about the size of a human hand. The core access chamber. The panel was where the ship was supposed to be activated. Everyone knew that. The problem was that no one knew how. Scientists had pressed it, scanned it, applied electrical current, tried voice commands in dozens of languages. Nothing worked. Eventually it had been labeled as non-functional, and mostly forgotten. Kang pushed the door open and stepped inside. He did not know why. He could not explain it, even to himself. He had just been walking through the dark ship, thinking about the fact that he was probably going to die up here, either when the oxygen ran out, or when the Velthari came back to check their work. And his feet had carried him here without being asked. He walked to the platform and stood in front of the panel. It was smooth, dark, and completely featureless. No buttons, no screen, just a flat surface the color of deep water. He thought about his grandfather. Old Day had been a strange man, quiet, sharp-eyed, obsessed with genealogy and bloodlines in a way that had always seemed odd to the rest of the family. He had spent decades tracing their family line backward, further and further, past records that most families did not have, past history that most people had never heard of. He had told Kang things, strange things, when Kang was a teenager, about their bloodline, about where it came from, about something in their family's past that was older than Korea, older than most of recorded human history, stretching back to a time when humanity had been something different than it was now. Kang had not believed him. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. There was a letter there, old paper, folded small. He had found it in his bunk locker 2 weeks ago, tucked inside a technical manual, in an envelope with his name on it, in his grandfather's handwriting. Old Day had been dead for 6 years. Kang still did not know how the letter had gotten there. He had read it many times by now. He knew it by memory. "The ship will know you," his grandfather had written. "You only have to show it your hand. The blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. I am sorry I could not explain this better while I was alive. I did not fully understand it myself, until it was too late to tell you in person. But when the time comes, and I believe it will come, do not be afraid. You are not just an engineer, Kang. You never were." Kang folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. He looked at the panel for a long moment. Then he took off his glove, reached out, and pressed his bare palm flat against the surface. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the ship woke up. It did not wake up slowly. It did not flicker or stutter or gradually come to life the way old machines did. It woke up all at once. Every system, every light, every screen, every engine, in a single instant, like a man opening his eyes after a long sleep and being immediately, completely alert. The golden light that flooded every corridor was not harsh. It was warm, steady, and somehow familiar, the way the light in a childhood home feels familiar, even after years away. The platform beneath Kang's feet hummed with deep, steady power. And somewhere deep in the ship's core, something ancient recognized the blood in his hand, and was satisfied. Kang stood very still in the glowing chamber. He exhaled slowly. Outside, in the cold dark of space, the Vilthari fleet was already turning back.